Good evening, everybody. My name is Christy. I'm part of the Student Doctor Network team here, and we thank you all for joining us this evening. Tonight, we'll be working through a psychology passage on the MCAT and some questions with Bryan. And Bryan, I forgot to check your pronunciation of your last name. Is it Schnedeker? Schnedeker?
Perfect.
Excellent. From Next Step Test Prep. Next Step focuses on personalized MCAT prep. They offer one-on-one tutoring with test prep veterans. All Next Step tutors must be experienced tutors who have scored very highly on the test they teach, which guarantees that you'll be working with a true expert. Bryan, our speaker this evening, is Next Step Test Prep's National MCAT Director. He has taught the MCAT to thousands of students over 10 years and has himself achieved a 525 on the current MCAT. In addition to teaching, Bryan has been involved with developing Next Steps books and practice tests. We'll go through the presentation. After that, we'll have a Q&A session with whatever time we have left. So throughout the presentation, if you have questions, you can type those into the question box in the control panel on the right of your screen. We'll get to as many of those as we can. All right, Bryan, thanks so much for being with us tonight, and I'll turn things over to you from here.
Okay, thank you very much, Christy. Let's get the camera up and running here. And I want to thank Student Dr. Net again for inviting us to come talk to everybody. Thanks, Christy, for helping us out with running tonight's event. As she mentioned earlier, we're going to be working through a psychology passage together, so I do just want to point out over on the side of your screen there, you should have a control panel where there's a handout. One of the headings should be handout. If you click on that, that's a PDF that you can pull up. Hopefully everyone has already gotten that printed out because the handout was included in the email announcements for the event. If you haven't done that, you can go ahead and take a second now, open that PDF, maybe even print it out if the printer's right there in the room. It's going to help tremendously for following through with the event. Like I said, we're going to be actually working through a psychology passage today. This is taken from one of Next Step's psychology strategy and practice books. First, just a little bit about me. As Christy had already mentioned, I'm the National Director of MCAT for Next Step Test Prep. I've been doing this for coming up on 15 years now, a long time. Taking the old MCAT a bunch of times. I took the new MCAT right at the start of the new season this past April, and have been working with literally thousands of students over the years, both with other major national companies and now with Next Step. So let's just dive right in. Okay, we're not going to beat around the bush here. We're just going to get started right away with strategy. So for those of you who have already taken the real MCAT or taken a practice exam, either an official AMC one or one from a prep company, you'll know that the exam lets you do a highlight function on the screen. So the passage will be on the left, the questions will be on the right, and you're allowed to highlight. So when you think about strategies that you're actually going to use on the psychology section itself, there are essentially only two things to do. One, you're allowed to highlight on the screen, and then two, you're given scratch paper. Well, my scratch paper is yellow, but they'll give you obviously plain white paper on test day. So we're going to talk about those two things. We're going to talk about highlighting, we're going to talk about note-taking, and then at the end we'll talk a little bit about finding your best way, your best strategy for dealing with any passage, including the psychology passages. So let's start with the highlighting function that the MCAT gives you. First, when you're doing the highlighting, as it says on the screen there, you're going to want to read relatively briskly. You're not reading to memorize the passage. You're not trying to learn the passage. You're trying to get a general sense of what's there, and use the highlighter just to capture some key points. So certain ideas that are worth using the highlight function, opinions, especially the author's opinion. Points of contrast, old versus new, author versus critic, the results of two different experiments. Anytime there's a key contrast, that's where the questions are going to come from. And then finally, and most importantly, cause and effect relationships. So when the passage says X caused Y, or P and Q are correlated, or A logically entails B, anything like that is definitely worth grabbing with the highlighter as you're briskly reading your way through the passage. Now, in addition to highlighting, you have scratch paper and you can take notes. Now, some people don't like to use the scratch paper at all. They find that it slows them down, having to stop the read, look down at the scratch paper, look back up at the screen. Other people find that the note-taking is really, really good for them. There are actually some test prep companies that only teach note-taking, as if that was the only possible way to do it. I'm a big fan of actually using a judicious use of both. We use the highlighter, as I had talked previously, as you read along, read briskly. We use the notes to focus on certain things that are better off written down. First and foremost being any kind of experimental conditions given. If you want to jot a few notes down to help you understand or remember what was going on in the experiment, that's going to be critically important in the psychology section as well as the hard sciences. We had already talked about cause and effect relationships, and so what some people find is that it's a lot easier to use the scratch paper and just say, oh, you know what, I'm going to draw like a little flow chart, like A leads to B, and B leads to C and D, and maybe enzyme X comes in, and it downregulates the translation from B to C. So the same sort of cause and effect relationships you could highlight. Some folks prefer to draw little flow chart notes. I find that's especially the case in the biological foundation section. As I had mentioned, if there's like an enzyme or a cell pathway, anything with a complicated multi-step pathway, you're almost always better off jotting down cause and effect notes rather than just trying to use the highlighter while going through the passage. And then finally, broadly, the notes are good for any sort of connections between things. And again, that's sort of very abstract. It'll make more sense once we actually start working our way through a passage. Okay, so again, highlighting brisk as you read along, contrast opinion, cause and effect, note-taking for more kind of hard facts, logical things, experimental connections, flowchart notes, or connections between ideas. So let's actually go through a psychology passage together, talk about what we could highlight, what note-taking we could do, and then actually answer the questions. So again, this is going to be your second and final reminder in your GoToWebinar panel over there on the side of your screen. You should see a little heading for handouts. Open that up, click it, pull up the PDF. It's going to be much, much easier for you to follow along if you either print out the PDF or have the PDF open in a separate window, because I'm going to be clicking back and forth on the PowerPoint slides, and you're not really going to be able to follow along so well if you're just relying on the slides. Okay, so having said that, let's just dive right in. So there's the first half of the passage up there on the screen. And for our purposes now, because this is the one passage we're doing together, I'm going to read us through the actual passage itself, which is going to take us a little bit longer, of course, than it would on test day. So we start reading, and it says, in an experiment designed to test cognitive dissonance. So right from the get-go, one of the things we would want, one of the things you would probably highlight is test cognitive dissonance. Okay, that's sort of an opinion. What's the point of this experiment? Researchers asked adult participants to rate their beliefs about eating meat. Okay, so maybe we would highlight adults because that's a particular point about who's being tested, and then maybe the word meat or beliefs about meat because that's what this psychological experiment is studying. So they're rating their beliefs about eating meat on a 1 to 5 scale. I believe that the consumption of meat is 5, healthy and ethical, and then 4, somewhat healthy, 3, neither healthy nor unhealthy, 2, unhealthy, and 1, very unhealthy and very unethical. So we've got a standard 5-point psychology rating scale. You don't necessarily need to highlight anything in there. If you did want to use the highlighter, maybe you would just highlight the word 5 and healthy, and then the word, the number 1 and very unhealthy. Just to get, again, we talked about contrast, just to get the contrast between those 2 points on the scale. Alternatively, remember we talked about note-taking, so maybe one of the notes you would jot down is from 5 to 1, where 5 is that meat is healthy and ethical, and number 1 is that it's unhealthy. Now, again, I'm jotting that down in the margin on the screen here. On test day, it would be a separate piece of paper that you would have on your desk. Okay, let's keep reading the experiment. Participants were then randomly assigned one of 2 essays to write, either a 1-page essay defending a vegan lifestyle or a 1-page essay defending meat eating. Okay, so again, we want to get the contrast. Let's highlight the word vegan on one hand and meat eating on the other hand to get that contrast. Each participant was randomly assigned to one of 5 groups. Group 1 wrote the essay defending veganism and was paid $10. Group 2 defended veganism and was paid $300. Group 4 defended meat consumption and was paid $10. I'm sorry, Group 3. Group 4 wrote the essay defending meat consumption and was paid $300. And group 5 was not asked to write any essay and was not paid. So now here again, this is really dense, describing the experimental procedure. Probably that would be, it wouldn't be worth highlighting there because your eye's going to go a little buggy as you're kind of as you're skimming around the screen trying to follow that. So again, this is a place where it's probably worth it to stop and jot a couple of notes down, just so you can keep the group straight. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm actually just going to write it down here on the table. So group 1 was vegan and $10. They wrote an essay defending veganism. Group 2 was $300. Group 3 defended meat. Group 4 defended meat. And again, this was paid $10 and paid $300. And in this case, in group 5, they weren't asked to write any essay and were not paid. So what does tell me in the question box, what does that make group 5 in terms of how this experiment was set up? Here, control. Okay, excellent. So now let's keep reading. 2 days later, all right, so 2 days later, we'll highlight that. Participants were asked to fill out the survey again about their attitudes. The results are summarized below. And we got a whole table of the results from 1 to 5. And then we see the caption for the table there. We should always read the caption. Results of the essay writing exercise on participants' beliefs. Data reported as a mean score on the 1 to 5 scale for all participants based on initial response and group assignment. So let's just take a quick look at that table there. We don't necessarily need to do a whole huge analysis of what all these numbers say, but we need to at least look at the axes and the units and the general trend of what's going on here. So the caption said they filled out the survey a second time, and we classified their results based on their initial attitude and what group they were in. So for example, here, the initial attitude of people who put 5 on the survey the first time, they said, oh yeah, eating meat is totally okay. Then if you look, for example, at group 1 and group 2, after saying meat is totally okay to eat, we paid them to write an essay defending a vegetarian, whatever, a vegan lifestyle. And then look what happened to the number. The average response people gave went down from 5. It went down to 4.4. Group 2, it went down to 4.8. Group 3 and 4, they defended meat consumption, so the answer stayed pretty close to 5, 4.95, 4.96. These are people who originally thought it was totally okay to eat meat. They wrote an essay saying it was okay, and their attitude stayed largely the same. Notice group 5, the control group, even there the number came down slightly. Right, so even people who were not asked to do anything, if you just ask them again 2 days later, at least some people changed their answer from 5 to 4. It dragged the average down a little bit below 5. Okay, so again, we're not going to go through the whole chart, but we look at the axes, we look at the titles, we get a general sense of what's going on in there. Okay, let's continue and finish up reading the passage. In a separate experiment, researchers placed 5-year-old children. Okay, now again, we're going to want to highlight that. Okay, where it says 5-year-old children. Mostly because, again, this is a point of contrast. Remember, contrast opinion, cause and effect. So before we had been studying adults, now we're studying 5-year-olds. They placed 5-year-old children in a room with toys, including one especially tempting toy, the most popular children's toy of that Christmas season. One group of children were given no instructions, and when left alone, selected the popular toy. Of course, very tempting. Right? In fact, let's highlight most popular children's toys so we know exactly what we're tempting them with here. The second group was told they could play with any toy but the popular one, and was told they'd be mildly punished if they disobeyed. So second group of kids, do not play with that popular toy. If you disobey, you'll get a little punishment. The third group was told they would be severely punished if they played with the popular toy. Okay, so group 3 comes in, don't play with the popular toy. If you do, you're in very big trouble. After leaving each group alone for 10 minutes, the researchers returned and told the children they could play with any toy they liked. In group 3, the severe punishment, most children elected to play with the popular toy after they were allowed to. So group 3, they're avoiding the risk of serious punishment, and then when they're permitted to play with the really tempting toy, of course they go right for it. In group 2, mild punishment, however, the majority of children still avoided playing with the popular toy, even if they were permitted to. So again, a real important contrast here. in how these two groups behaved, these two groups of children behaved. Now, the passage doesn't tell us what that means. It doesn't give us any analysis of the experiment, and that's to be expected, right? The MCAT's not going to hand us everything about what the experiment means, although they will typically give us the data, the setup of the experiment and the data in the end. Okay, so we're done reading our way through the passage. Now, we took some notes earlier. We did a bunch of highlighting here. The amount of time you invest doing something like that on test day is going to vary tremendously in the science sections. In the verbal, the critical analysis, or I'll just call it CARS, in the CARS section, reading a verbal passage is pretty consistent. It's always going to take about 4 or 5 minutes. But in the sciences, it's all over the place. Some of the passages are super short and easy. You can read them in a minute or whatever, a minute and a half. Some of the passages are crazy long biochemistry passages, and it takes a long time, 4 or 5 minutes to hack your way through it. But typically, you're going to want to average somewhere between those. Something like 3 or 4 minutes to briskly get through the passage, highlight your contrast opinion, cause and effect, and then jot any notes down about connections or experimental conditions on your scratch paper. Okay, so there it is. We have done the question. We've done the passage. Now, at this point, we have gotten exactly 0 points, right? And the points, of course, are all entirely in the questions. So let's talk for just one more quick second about figures on the MCAT, because there was this crazy complicated table in this passage. So as I had mentioned before, while reading the passage itself, the key things to look for are the units, the axes, and the general trends, going up, going down, biggest, least, and so on. Don't spend a huge ton of time analyzing the passage, analyzing the figure, because you don't get any points for it until you get to the questions. It's when you're actually answering the questions when you specifically start to analyze in more detail. Who was the control group? Now, we had already talked about that because it was pretty straightforward here, but maybe it's more complicated and you don't do that right away. You then go really a deep dive, a real careful analysis on the trends. How did the groups differ? A very careful analysis based on what the questions are asking. And finally, and this third point here is really the reason for this whole discussion, is you shouldn't assume you even necessarily need the figure. This is much more the case in the biological foundation section rather than the psychology section, but it can happen there as well, where you're getting a quotation from a primary research journal article, and the MCAT writers don't necessarily do you any favors. They will throw 1 or 2 additional figures in there that you don't even need to reference. So that's the idea behind not over-investing on it in the passage, right? Just get a general sense. What's going on here? What are the axes? What are the units? Okay, let's move on. Then when you get to the questions, make sure you actually understand the question first, understand what the question is getting at, and decide, well, is the figure even relevant? Don't just immediately start analyzing the figure. It's when you decide that the figure is relevant, that's when you actually say, okay, well, let's do this deep dive. Let's look really closely at what's going on in this figure. Okay. So now let's actually look at the question. So let's start with question number 8 here. Which of the following identifies a weakness in the experimental design of the first experiment? Now, this is a classic sort of experimental construction type question, and this is something that we have seen a whole lot of this past summer of the first season of this new MCAT. The AMC was very, very explicit when they released their official guide that said, we are now going to build into the MCAT not just an analysis of your knowledge and problem-solving ability, but do you know how to do the business of science? Do you know what it means to be a working scientist, to create experiments, to see where they go right or wrong? And we've gotten questions like this. I got one like this on my own MCAT, where it's just literally saying, okay, well, go back, reread the experiment, figure out a potential weakness in the design of the first experiment. So I'm going to give you just 30 seconds, read through the answer choices, and decide what you think is the right answer. And I'm going to go ahead and open up a poll here, and you can just click on the answer that you think is the right answer. So go ahead and take a second and do that. Okay, so let's see what we said. Okay, so it looks like we got a fairly split class. This means this is a good question because there were a bunch of answer choices that were tempting here. We see that a majority, actually a very strong proportion of the group, more than half, selected answer choice D, and that is the right answer. The correct answer is D. And it looks like A and B were also both fairly tempting. A and B had a lot of folks picking that. So let's actually take a look at the question and talk our way through those answer choices. So first, the correct answer, answer choice D. Both the initial and follow-up survey conflate two factors that may be different and have different effects on cognitive dissonance. So that's the right answer. Tell me in the question box, what are the two factors that the experiment put together inappropriately, because they're different questions. Tell me in the question box, what are the two things that it put together that it should not have? Okay, so Tom says health versus ethics. Sadhu says healthy and unethical. Denya says money and opinion. Jenny mentions the money. Julie mentions health and ethics. There you go. So it looks like we've got it right there. The fundamental problem, of course, is that we've got two basically different factors, right? Is it healthy and is it ethical? And of course, those are just two different questions. It would be entirely possible for someone to think, oh, it's healthy to eat meat, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not really very ethical. Alternatively, someone could think, well, there's nothing wrong with eating meat from an ethical standpoint, they're just animals, but you probably should eat more vegetables to be healthy. So by conflating those two factors together, the experimental design is really weak, really bad. It's a poorly constructed experiment. If we look at the other two answer choices here that got a bunch of respondents, A and B, answer choice B, participants were asked to self-report. This is just a normal part of social science studies. It's not considered a flaw. That's normal operating business. You ask people to self-report things all the time, symptoms, attitudes, opinions, and so on. You can certainly construct experiments based on studying behavior, but there's nothing wrong with, from an experimental design standpoint, with self-reporting. Totally okay. And then they're not a constant marginal gain in value. In this case, again, that's not a weakness in the experiment. That was on purpose, right? We wanted a $10 group and we wanted a $300 group to specifically see the differing effects of offering a relatively small money and a much larger sum of money. And again, this is a kind of standard operating procedure in the social sciences. When you want to reward a group, you don't tweak the reward based on the socioeconomic status of the participant. If you're rewarding people $3, you're rewarding them $3 regardless. Okay, so answer choice D here, major flaw in the experiment. Okay, let's take a look at number 9. The participants in the second experiment differ from those in the first in that, okay, if we look back at our handout, we remember what we highlighted was that in the first experiment it was adults, in the second experiment it was 5-year-olds. So this is just going to be a question about the basic difference between adults and little kids. So again, go ahead and read through the answer choices, decide what you think the right answer is, and then I'll pull the poll up and let everybody. Okay, so again, the class had a pretty strong preference here, actually overwhelming, 60%. There was nothing else was even close. The class preferred answer choice B. So again, it looks like we've got a pretty smart group here because answer choice B is absolutely right, that 5-year-olds operate on pre-conventional moral reasoning. And we want to, for the MCAT, be familiar with Kohlberg's stages of moral reasoning: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. Little kids operate at the pre-conventional stage. School-age children, 6 to 12, operate at the conventional stage. And then later in adolescence into adulthood, we move into the post-conventional stage. So that's where the 5-year-olds are. The other answer choice that got some tempting responses there from students was they picked answer choice D, that the cognitive was limited to the sensory motor stage. So this is another scale that we have to know for the MCAT with Piaget's stages of reasoning of cognitive development. And sensory motor is actually infants, it's just babies who are understanding the world just by kind of flailing their limbs around and feeling things, grabbing on with that little infant grip where they grab onto everything. So sensory motor, most kids move out of the sensory motor stage by about 2, even maybe a little bit before 2, 1, 1.5. The 5-year-olds are going to be operating past the sensory motor stage. So that doesn't apply to these toddlers, these preschool kids. Okay, so in question number 8, classic experimental design question. Question number 9, a classic bring in your outside knowledge question that the MCAT likes to ask. Let's keep moving here. Let's go to question number 10. The results from experiment 1 suggest that those in group 3 who initially responded with a 1, 2, or 3 on the survey, and then we have to figure out what happened with group 3, who initially responded with a 1, 2, or a 3. Okay, so remember before I said don't do a real deep dive on the chart until you have to, once the question actually demands it. So group 3 responded with a 1, 2, or a 3. So I'm actually just going to go all the way back there in the slides and let's get real specific. So if they responded with a 1, 2, or a 3, then they thought originally that it was not okay to eat meat. They were against it. It was either unhealthy or it was unethical or both. And remember, group 3 wrote the essay defending meat consumption, and they were only paid $10 to do so. So in this case, they had a certain belief. It's not okay to eat meat. Then they engaged in a behavior writing a defense of meat, for which they weren't really paid. I mean, they paid $10, not a whole lot. So this is now the classic example of cognitive dissonance. And in fact, this experiment is modeled on the classic experiment for cognitive dissonance, which is you take a belief that someone has, you just ask them what they believe, then you make them do something against their belief. We've now created dissonance. And let's look at what happened. So the group who thought meat was super bad, who put a 1 on the survey, that number went up from 1. It went almost up to 1.2. And notice that the control group of 1.1, group 3 came up more. Their beliefs changed. The people who had originally put 2 on the survey, I think eating meat is kind of unhealthy, kind of unethical. Their number went up enormously. Their average went up to almost 2.4. And again, notice the control group only came up to 2.1. And then finally, same thing with group 3. They came all the way up to 3.3. The control group didn't even come up to 3.1, only came up to 3.05. So notice, if someone believes it's wrong to eat meat, then you make them write an essay defending meat consumption. Look at what happens. Those responses to those attitude surveys, those responses change by quite a bit, and by quite a bit more than the control group. So now we've done the deep dive on the chart. We figured out exactly what's going on here. Now we actually go back and answer the question. Okay, so go ahead, pull out your hand out there, look at the answer choices, and pick the answer number 10. Okay, let's go ahead and see what people had to say. Okay, interesting. We got an even split here with answer choice A nudging out answer choice C by a good bit, 53% to 40%. So in this case, the correct answer is actually C, and let's see why that's the case. So the right answer here, although most folks actually went for A, but let's first talk about the right answer. Why is it C? So they had cognitive dissonance. They had that unpleasant, dissonant feeling of, I believe this, but I did this. My beliefs and my behaviors do not align. And remember what the survey showed us. When we surveyed them again, they changed their attitude. I initially put a 2. I think meat is unethical. After you make me write the essay, I now put a 3 on the survey. Or I originally put a 3, I think meat's a kind of either way. Then I write an essay defending meat consumption. Now I put a 4. Or, the average went up by 3.4 over the whole group. So they had a cognitive dissonance, an unpleasant feeling, and they resolved it by saying, well, I didn't really mean 2 last time on the survey. Maybe I meant 3 on the survey. They changed their ideas. Okay. Answer choice A suggests they experienced increased cognitive dissonance, and there's nothing in the experiment to suggest that the cognitive dissonance got even worse, because in order to know that, we would have to then survey them again after the second survey. The experiment would have had to continue somehow for us to figure out, well, after the second survey, what was going on in their head. So the trick here is recognizing exactly what cognitive dissonance is. It's the unpleasant feeling of having two things that don't go together, two beliefs, two behaviors, a belief and a behavior, and that you resolve the dissonance. You get rid of that unpleasant feeling by altering something. In this case, they altered their ideas, their cognitions. Oh yeah, no, I really meant to put 4 on the survey. Okay, so congrats to the 40% that got that one right. For the folks who put A here, the big takeaway is going to be to make sure we really understand exactly what cognitive dissonance is, how it works, and how we resolve it. Speaking of, let's actually just look at number 11, because here's another outside knowledge question. Which of the following is not a method for resolving cognitive dissonance? Okay, let's take a look. Okay, so again, a split here, where C is now edged out at the winner at 50%, but B and D both fairly tempting for folks. Okay, so in this case, the class got this one right. The correct answer is C. So let's take a look and talk about why it's C. Okay, so not a way to resolve cognitive dissonance. Answer choice C actually brings up projection. Okay, projection relates to a very specific idea in psychology. I just out of curiosity, I wonder if anyone can describe the definition of projection, or who's the psychologist who's really kind of famously associated with projection? Can you tell me in the question box, who's the guy who was all about using projection to explain human psychology? The answer choice C, projection, is a Freudian ego defense mechanism, ego defense. So Freud came up with a number of ways that we make ourselves feel better. We defend our ego, so to speak, project attitudes onto other people, denial, like that's the classic Freudian thing, oh, deny it. Repression, suppression, transference, countertransference. There's a whole host of these Freudian ego defense mechanisms. In any event, that's not what this question's asking about, right? This question is specifically asking about this idea of cognitive dissonance. And so if you have two beliefs or two behaviors or a belief and a behavior that don't go together and it makes you uncomfortable that they don't go together, you can change your behavior. You can deny the new information. Right, so say some new information comes in to create dissonance. You can say, well, I don't believe that. That can't be true. Or you can add in a new cognition. An example of that might be, I believe that I should eat a healthy diet, but I'm going to stop at McDonald's on the way home. Okay, now I have some dissonance because I like to stop and get some McDonald's, but I also believe I should eat a healthy diet. Well, let me add a new cognition. Oh, but I won't put the salad dressing, or I'll have them hold the mayo. That will cut out the calories and the fat. So you add a new idea to kind of resolve the discrepancy, resolve that unpleasant feeling. So A, B, and D are all classic ways you can resolve cognitive dissonance. Okay, finally, let's take a look at the last question here, number 12. The results from experiment 1 suggest that group 2, who responded with a 3, 4, or 5 on the initial survey, experienced which of the following? Okay, again, we got to do a deep dive on that chart because this question is asking something very specific. Group 2, who answered a 3, 4, or 5 originally. Okay, so let's take a look. Actually, I'm just going to skip right back up there. The question was group 2, who answered a 3, 4, or 5 on the initial survey. Okay, 3, 4, or 5. So these were people who thought, you know, it's totally okay to eat meat, or at least it's fine enough. And the question was specifically about group 2, and group 2, the passage told us, wrote the essay defending veganism, right? So you gotta have the vegetarian thing, and they were paid $300. Okay. So we paid them a good chunk of money to write this essay. They initially said, yeah, you know what, I think eating meat is totally fine. And then they wrote an essay on a vegan lifestyle. And let's take a look at what happened, right? So the people who originally put 5, that average came down slightly to 4.8, which was a little bit more than the control group of 4.9. We can contrast that with group 1 that was only paid $10, who came down all the way down to 4.4. So group 1 had this big change in attitude. Group 2 only changed a little bit. Okay, the people who had originally put a 4 put now 3.75. Notice they came down a little bit, but again, contrasting that with group 1 that was only paid $10, Group 1, their attitude shifted all the way down to a 3.3, much closer to neutral. And then finally, the people who were initially neutral stayed almost the same. I mean, they put 3 originally. They stayed at 2.9, fairly close to 3, so their attitudes didn't change much. So now doing a real careful look at Group 1 and Group 2, both of whom defended the vegan lifestyle, what we're seeing is if you only pay people $10, their attitudes shifted a whole lot from their initial answer. If you're willing to pay them $300, they shifted downward, but not by as much. Okay, so now let's take a look at the answer choices and see what we should put. Go ahead, take a second, read through the answer choices. Okay, let's see what everybody put. Okay, all right, to be fair, I think I kind of handed it to you here. You know, I walked you really carefully through the table, so maybe I made it a little too easy. That 83% is the highest percent we got for any of the questions, but that is the right answer, answer choice A. So the in that case, it's the folks who they didn't have to change their attitudes very much. They experienced less cognitive dissonance. Group 1 had a ton of cognitive dissonance. Their attitudes shifted a lot because the $10 didn't justify their behavior to themselves. If you pay the $300, the reaction of the subject in the experiment is going to be, well, of course I wrote an essay defending veganism. You paid me $300 to do it. I still think meat is fine, but I'll write the essay for $300. Why not? Right? That's answer choice A. No real dissonance because that external reward it justified their behavior to themselves. Okay, so that wraps up our practice passage and question set here, and I want to congratulate the class overall with your performance. We, as a class, we did quite well. We got 4 out of 5 of them, a majority of the class picked, and on one of them, it was almost a majority. We had about 40-something% get that one right, almost get that one right. So a high difficulty, challenging psych passage with kind of a lumpy, tricky chart to figure out. Nonetheless, we did well analyzing it. So remember, what we want to do is practice highlighting, practice note-taking. Those are the two tools that the MCAT gives us on test day to work through the passage, and then we do the additional analysis as needed when it actually comes up in the questions. So let's wrap up our MCAT discussion by talking about the big 5 prep tips. In my 15 years of doing this, working with thousands of students, what are the 5 things that I want every student to know as they start to get ready for the MCAT? The first one is by far the most important, and it's going to surprise you a little bit to hear this because as someone who works in the test prep industry, it's literally my job to get people to pay us to do test prep. The number one thing, the number one most important thing to do when it comes to doing good MCAT prep is absolutely free. It doesn't cost you a dime, and that's study groups. Now, I know what you're thinking. Like, oh, this guy says study groups. Yeah, right. You kind of have this deep inward groan. It's like every good student's reaction when the professor says, this next project is going to be a group project, and you're like, oh. I'm going to have to do all the work, and those 4 lazy schlubs are not going to do anything. I have to do it all myself. Like, that's how we kind of react to that because we're the really hardworking, almost kind of uptight, really focused type A personalities who really want to do a good job. But here's the thing. Those schlubs who didn't do any work when you were doing group study, they're not prepping for the MCAT. They're not prepping for it at your level. By the time you get to your level of MCAT prep, it's only the hard workers, only the gunners in the room who are going to be there with you. And the study groups allow you, and in fact are required, for the 2 most important things when it comes to success on the MCAT. Number 1 is frankly the most important thing to get through any difficult time in life, right? I mean, the MCAT is a major life stressor. And so how do we get through any difficult time in life? Well, if you're in my family, you drink. But assuming you're healthy, right? Like, you get through it with other people, right? Church groups, support groups, friends, family. You rely on other people to get through difficult times in life. And your MCAT study group is a little built-in support network for you to work together. And second, and even more important, the reason you have to form a study group if you want to succeed on the MCAT is that it allows you to do the best way to learn anything in life, which is very simple. teach it to other people. The mantra you hear in med school, see one, do one, teach one. It's that teach one that really lets you learn how to do stuff. And you form a study group, not because you want, oh, let me get that smart guy for my physics class. He could teach me. No, 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 no. You want to teach other people. So you teach each other. Study groups, the most important thing to do, absolutely free. Number two, let's talk for a second about the verbal, the critical analysis section. I'm not going to go into this a lot, but it's so important. I had to put it in here, even in a psychology presentation. Do not believe anybody who tells you this is the method to do verbal passages. Again, this is the cardinal sin that I saw when I worked for other companies. They try to tell you, oh, you have to do the so-and-so method for verbal. There's no choice. That's hogwash. There are as many different ways to be successful reading the passage as there are different successful MCAT students. Again, I've worked with thousands of students. I've seen thousands of variations on reading techniques. Skimming, highlighting, note-taking, skimming the questions first. I mean, students have all sorts of different ways of doing the critical analysis reading passages. So you have to start early, and you have to practice different approaches to find what works best for you. Start early. Get a prep book. Get like the Next Step verbal book and go through all those passages trying these different techniques. Now, I've been talking a lot about strategy, so I do want to change gears slightly and just talk about the science content. One of the major mistakes students make with science content, and MCAT students make with science content, is this, I call it buy another book-itis. This like disease where you just have to buy another book. Med students do it too. Like, I don't know, I'm struggling with pathology. Let me buy the BRS review. Let me buy this. Let me, like, they always want to buy another book. The reality is, to learn that science content, you just have to do repetition. You just have to do the same stuff over and over and over again. And the rule of twos is just a way to repeat. So you repeat things after 2 minutes, 2 hours, and 2 days. Although the 2 minutes is usually set as 20 minutes. So you don't need to buy another book. You just need to learn the book you've currently got. And if you're trying to review a particular science concept, let's say Kohlberg's stages of moral reasoning that we talked about earlier, repeat it until you got it in the short term. Put it down, go do something else, come back 2 hours later, repeat it again. Put it down, sleep for 2 days. Gotta sleep. You need that REM sleep and stage 3 non-REM sleep to consolidate your long-term memories. You learn more while you're asleep in terms of those long-term memories than you often do while you're awake. You sleep for 2 days, you come back, you do it again. 2 minutes, 2 hours, 2 days. The repetition is essential. The repetition is essential. Okay, don't fall for buy another book-itis. Learn the books you've got. Next, number 4, we talked about this already, so I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on this, that when you're doing the passages, especially in the science sections, make sure you use the 2 tools that you have available, the scratch paper and the highlighting function. Make sure you practice to find out which is your best approach. And then finally, and I know all of you know this already, you have to know what you're walking into on test day. So the big things to do here, yes, of course, you should talk to your friends, you should talk to your professors, your pre-med advisors. They will all give you good advice, but in the end, you just have to take full practice tests. The AAMC has 2 of them out. You must take both of those, and then you're certainly going to need more than that. You need to go to a prep company, someone like Next Step or one of our competitors who sells practice tests. You have to know what you're getting yourself into on test day, and you do that by just practicing the real exam under timed conditions. So I want to thank everybody again for coming out. I want to talk for just a couple of minutes about what we offer here at Next Step to help you do exactly those 5 big tips that I talked about. What can help you improve your score? So first, the practice tests. We offer a test interface with the content, strategy, difficulty, and breakdown that is exactly like the real exam. Our tests look and feel just like the real test. If you look at how the questions are laid out, and again, the content of it, you'll get a perfect simulation. And then the explanations that we offer, I think, are frankly some of the best in the business, if not the best, because we'll give you a full breakdown of every answer choice, not just a quick, oh, this is how you do it, but why are the wrong answers wrong? We'll even show you, how I showed you the bar graphs of what the other kids in the webinar put for their answer? We do that on our testing platform. We give you little bar graphs to show you what everyone else put on that question. So you can see, like, oh, is this an easy question? Did a lot of students get it right? Was my answer a tempting answer that other people put? We always like to kind of see where we're fitting in with everyone else there. We do offer a half-length diagnostic test that is absolutely free that you can sign up for on our website, and that can give you a real good feel for how our system works in terms of the difficulty, the look and the feel, and all of that stuff. And then we sell a package of 5 full-length exams. Of course, students always want to buy MCAT prep books. You actually don't have to. You can prepare reasonably well for the MCAT only using the free Khan Academy videos and practice tests. But students, we all like paper. No matter how much Kindle tries to push us to ebooks, we all like to have paper. And so what Next Step has done here is a little bit different than the way most MCAT prep books are published. Most companies just offer a set, like here's our books, that's it, boom, nothing. We recognize that different students need different things. We are at our core a tutoring company, so that informs everything we do, including how we publish our books. So we recognize that some kids need content review. They just need to relearn all the sciences, so we made a whole series of books just doing content review. We recognize that other kids don't need to review the content. They've already taken a class or they're currently in these classes. They just need practice. So we made a second set of books called Strategy and Practice with full-time sections for students who need that. And then finally, by far our best-selling book, is consistently one of the #1 best-selling books on Amazon in the MCAT category, is a lot of students just need a ton of practice in the critical analysis section. They just want a bunch of verbal practice. So we have 108 verbal passages arranged in 12 full-time sections. Very, very popular book for students who just want to hammer out a ton of verbal practice. And then finally, like I said, our specialty here at Next Step is one-on-one private tutoring. And why do people come to us? First and foremost, because everything is customized to your needs. We don't give you a single cookie-cutter syllabus that everyone follows. Your study plan is made custom to you. We're also extremely selective with our tutors. We require a level of performance on the real exam and at least a year of teaching experience before we will even interview somebody. Plus, frankly, we pay them more than the other big national companies, so our tutors are quite a bit better than the other options that you have out there. And because we're a really small company and we're focused, we don't do classes, all we do is private tutoring, we can offer our private tutoring at a lower cost than everyone else in the business. In fact, our base 16-hour package, even our 24-hour package, is competitive with the group class that you would go to another company. I will note, though, quickly, our prices just went up this week. So if you do decide that you want to sign up one-on-one tutoring with us, the price that's there on the screen, the $18.99 for the 16-hour package or the $26.49, just tell when you come to sign up with tutoring, say, hey, I was at this webinar with Bryan. He said there were the lower prices. We will still give you the old lower prices. We're happy to do that. Now, is one-on-one tutoring worth it for you? I mean, that's a pretty big investment, right? It's a lot of time, it's a lot of money. The reality is that the tutoring is good for certain kinds of students. So if you already tried and it didn't go well, we get a lot of folks who are refugees from group classes. It's just the teacher's no good or it's not going well, and they just need to hit the reset button and start over. Alternatively, maybe you just have a crazy busy schedule, and so you can't make a routine class. You need something that's going to be customized to you. That's what tutoring is good for. Finally, if you have very particular needs, you're shooting for the absolute elite, kind of Harvard Med School best of the best. Maybe you're in a post-bac program, and so you're coming at it from a different place than most undergrads. Or maybe you're looking for like an overseas or a DO school where you don't need to get the classic 30 or 510. You have needs that are different than a typical student. In that case, a generic group prep course is not going to work for you. You're going to want one-on-one private tutoring. So again, I would like to thank everybody for attending tonight's event. I want to thank SDN for hosting me and letting me talk to all of you. I want to thank Christy for helping out getting the event set up. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to hang out for a few more minutes, or really as long as you'd like. And just go ahead and type your questions in the question box. Alternatively, if you do want to get in touch with us, all of our contact info is right there on the screen. So thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, Bryan. Appreciate your time. We have a couple of questions. We don't have a whole lot of time. We'll try and end right about 9 Eastern. But if you do have questions, you can pop those in the question box. And then if we don't get to them tonight, Bryan will make sure that you get those so that you can follow up as needed to answer those questions. Our first question says, I started my test prep in February of this year. I received the full package of test materials, but now that there have been a few 2015 exams administered, I want to know if it's okay, if there was a large change in the material, is it okay to keep the material I already have, or should I consider purchasing new material?
That's a good question, and you are absolutely fine as long as the stuff that you are working with was written for the current 2015 version of the test. Honestly, there weren't a whole lot of surprises with the test. The AMC has been very good, very transparent about what was coming. I would say the only real surprise that we saw was there seemed to be a remarkable degree of variability, which was always the case on the MCAT, and now it seems kind of dialed up to 11. When I say variability, when I took my own MCAT, I didn't hardly get any physics. I think I could count on one hand the number of physics questions I got. And then one of my students who took the test the very next month said, oh, I got 3 whole passages of nothing but physics. So you've got to be well prepared for that variation, but any good reputable set of prep books will still be totally fine. If it was put out, my rule of thumb here, and it's a little bit of a tangent, but I think this is important for folks to know. If you're deciding on a set of books to buy, only buy books from people who teach live students. So Next Step, Exam Crackers, Princeton Review, Kaplan, Berkeley Review, only buy books from the companies that actually know what they're doing. Don't just go buy like Barron's or Houghton Mifflin or one of these publisher books. Those are almost always really low quality. But if you bought a set of EK books or a set of Kaplan books or a set of Next Step books for earlier in the year, they're totally fine.
Excellent. All right, question number 2. Is there any MCAT study schedule to study all the material in a little less than 2 months? I decided to take the January 22nd MCAT, but I haven't begun to study.
Okay, 2 months is tough. Well, I'll give you the short answer, no. I know that's not what you want to hear, but students have a difficult time getting through all the MCAT content in 4 months, much less 2. But here's the good news. You can do quite well in the MCAT without reviewing literally everything, without rehashing 2.5 to 3 years worth of undergrad science. So what you want to do with a 2-month schedule is strictly stick to the high-yield topics, the stuff that you are the most concerned about. And here's how you get started with that. Go to Amazon or AMC.org and purchase a book called The Official Guide. Real simple, that's its title, Official Guide to the MCAT. If you've already got it, great, fantastic. And in the official guide is a full breakdown of all the science content on the MCAT. You want to start by spending 2 or 3 days just going through bullet point by bullet point, how well do I know this topic? Give it a little rating, 1 for I'd never heard of this, 2 for I kind of know it, 3 for I'm a pro. And then over the course of the 2 months, you want to focus on doing practice, take the 2 full AMC tests, do the AMC section packs, buy the Next Step full lengths, try those. You want to focus on practice and then do the content review either with books or the Khan Academy, only on those areas that you know you're weaker on.
Okay, great. The next question, is the new cars section similar to the old cars section?
Yeah, well, on the old test it was called verbal reasoning, not cars. Yeah, and it I was gonna say it's exactly the same. All they did was slap a fresh coat of paint on it, give it a fancy new name. In fact, it is so similar that the AMC themselves, in the section packs and practice exams, have recycled old verbal passages from the old MCAT. So there's one about like Confucius and something. I've been teaching the Confucius passage to kids for a decade. And what did the AMC do? Plop it right back into the question packs for the new version of the MCAT. So the only differences are they went from 7 passages to 9. They went from 52 minutes or whatever. They went for a relatively short period of 60 minutes, excuse me. They went from 60 minutes up to 90 minutes. And they cut out hard sciences. So it's just humanities and social sciences. But the reality on verbal or cars has always been just read a passage, answer questions. So in terms of the cognitive demands that it places on us, it's exactly the same.
All right, this will be, I think, our last question, and then we'll, again, collect any other questions and get those to the Next Step crew so they can follow up with you all. Our last question asks, was the passage that we covered an AAMC passage?
Oh, no, the AAMC stuff is copyrighted by the AAMC, and so even if we wanted to, we couldn't. And more importantly, I wouldn't do that because the AMC official resources are very, very valuable, and I always want my students to be able to do them for real under timed conditions. So I would never take an AMC passage and present it in a webinar or kind of like burn it, like use it up. in any other context. No, this passage was taken from the Next Step Strategy and Practice Psychology book. And I specifically picked it because I wanted something that was kind of a backbreaker. I wanted something that was was tough and subtle with a lot of tempting wrong answers, just to show you kind of more the high, medium to high or high end of difficulty that you might see on the real test.
Very good. I think that will wrap us up for the evening. Bryan, thanks again for spending some time with us, and thanks to all of you who took an hour out of your evening. We hope that this was valuable to you. We hope you found it helpful. Quick note before we go, if you want to hear any of this again or share it with anyone else, we'll be posting it on the Student Doctor Network YouTube channel in the near future, next couple of days. You can follow us on Facebook or Twitter. Our Twitter is @StudentDoctor. For updates, I'll send out when that's available. And of course, you can also check just youtube.com/StudentDoctor, I think. So that will bring us to an end. Thanks again. Have a great evening.
Thanks all. Have a good night.